Welcome to Unscripted Believe at Noon, the podcast on Noon Miracle, where we sit down for real conversations that reveal the miracle in all of us. I'm your host, Amy Goldberg, joined by my amazing co-host and the founder of Noon Miracle, Jane Sibbett. And today's guest, we're excited to welcome Sam George. Each episode, we get to know someone new, not just by what they do, but who they are, by simply talking and listening. It's all about connection, curiosity, and discovering the magic that lives in all of us. So let's dive in. This is Believe at Noon. Well, first of all, welcome to Believe at Noon. Yay!
Hi, Sam.
Great. Jane, it's really nice to see you again.
I know, and it's so wonderful, Kate. I just want to let the viewers and listeners know that Jane and Sam know each other. So let's just start. First of all, how do you know each other?
Sam, you want to take it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's amazing that it goes back this far, but we moved, my dad was in the military and he was stationed in Hawaii. And in 1970, we moved to the East Bay, San Francisco East Bay. He was transferred to Alameda Naval Air Station. And we moved to this town of Alameda, which ironically enough, or appropriately enough, was an island. So we moved from one island to another island. And I was in 1970 and I started high school. I was a high school freshman, but my younger brother, actually two of my younger brothers, Matt and Michael, they were at an elementary school, and Matthew very quickly became good friends with a kid named Don Sibbett, and they lived a few blocks, actually one block over from us on Hawthorne Street. And then we met, of course, all the other wonderful Sibbetts. I mean, Jane's older brother, Scott, was in my class, and Don and Matt were friends. And so we got to meet Jane, and that was in 1970.
I was just going to say, it was like 20 years ago, right? No.
And also Gregory, too. Gregory was in my class, yeah.
That's right, my younger brother, Gregory. Wait, is that 50 years ago?
I don't think we're even that old. That's so crazy to conceive.
20 years ago. Come on.
Yeah.
No, it's more than 50 years, Sam.
No, I know. It's more than 50 years.
That's insane.
Yesterday, you know.
You two are both Benjamin Buttons.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. I was thinking about yesterday. I'm only 364 days away from 70. So that's pretty amazing. So,
17, right? That's 17.
Yeah. I've often felt I lived in a protracted state of adolescence anyways.
Well, Sam, it definitely suits you. I mean, come on. First of all, I want to hear the story too about why are we interviewing you in your car? Surfer dude.
Well,
are we going surfing?
Yeah, I know. It's pretty funny. About a year and a half ago, my partner Cammie and I, we moved up to this island north of Seattle to move in and take care of her father, who's in the early stages of cognitive decline. I mean, it's great. We still live right on the water and, ocean views and such, but it's a little town, and it's a farming town, which most people think of Washington as, the Olympic Peninsula with rainforests and fog and trees. I live in a farming town. And I mean, right across the street from me is like a dairy farm. And so we're outside the city limits. And so we get horrible internet. And it's really frustrating sometimes, and phone service horrible. So to do this Zoom call, I started freezing up and pixelating. So I had to rush out into my car with my computer, jump in my car and drive into town to get to the library where there's good Wi-Fi. But the problem was, right as I pulled out, I got stuck behind a farm tractor. And so I had to go like 8 miles an hour. And then I go by the high school, and there's kids crossing the crosswalk, and I'm going, perfect. Here I am. When there's times when I miss the rush and hurry and bustle of Southern California, but
you had it with the tractor today.
Yeah, no, there I was behind.
You had your. I used to say that when I lived in Waimea. We have our rush 10 minutes when people are dropping off their kids.
Yeah.
I think
we live right up the road from a ferry that comes across the Sound from Port Townsend, and
cool.
That's the traffic here. It's called ferry traffic, and like 18 cars will get off and they'll drive by, and you're just going, "Oh, come on!"
It's a traffic jam.
Yeah, come on.
Traffic jam.
Yeah,
18 cars.
Is that the LA traffic that you're talking about?
Yeah, I know. No, yeah, it was pretty interesting. I mean, I was down Southern California last month. I got stuck in apocalyptic traffic in LA, and I was thinking, in the time it took me to go like 40 miles up here, I could almost be through Oregon into California.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Well, it's so good to have you here, Sam. You
yeah.
know, Amy knows how much I love the George brothers, how you've been iconic and informed my young life. So I'm what a joy to have. And this arrived.
Yeah, there you, oh, you got it. You're holding it in your hand.
I'm holding it in
Jane
my
is
hand.
holding up Child of
Yeah,
Storms.
I
Can
know.
you
Oh, it's
see
fantastic.
it?
I
And
know.
there it is.
I know. It's kind of,
It's so
it's,
exciting. It's so exciting. I'm so proud of you. I mean, I've been yeah, I'm not only just following you from afar, hearing about the stories from my brother, but really so proud of you. You know, you're family to me, and so to see all the things you've done in your life, I was always so curious, like how did you, Sam, and George Brothers in plural, how did everyone become such great storytellers? Where did that come from?
I've sort of, I I sort of address that in, if I talk to anybody about this, I always go, oh, it's in the book. Of course. Oh, it's in the book. But
It
I've really
is.
been thinking a lot about it because I've been asked that question more now than in my entire
Mhm,
professional writing life.
mhm.
And I think there's two factors. One is, well, three. One is my dad, for example, Captain Raymond E.
Dr.
George.
George.
Yeah, Dr. George. He was an inveterate reader. I mean, he loved reading. He loved, and he sort of leaned more not towards intellectual reading, but more like adventure reading, romance,
Mm.
stories, things like that. And he would read to us when we were younger. And then when I was a little kid, I would read to him. It would put him to sleep on the weekends. He'd want to take a nap. I'd read to him. So
Mm.
I was a reader at a very early age. I had what you would call exceptional reading skills and comprehension. On the other side of it, my mom was an elementary school teacher.
Mm.
She not only encouraged us to read, but she always encouraged us to write stuff down. Like I'd tell her something that happened during the day or some kind of adventure, or we'd come back from hunting or fishing with my dad or whatever. And she'd say, well, write that down. And so there were those two elements
Mm.
in the home of reading and writing. The most important thing I think as a writer is to be a reader. I mean that
Yeah,
because you start you start learning what it's like to put perception down on paper, so to speak, or on a keyboard.
right.
That's
The
so
third
true.
element was when in the early 1960s, my father was in sea duty. He was serving aboard a U.S. naval vessel, and his fleet got transferred to the Mediterranean as part of the 7th Mediterranean Fleet. And my dad didn't want to leave us behind for 3 years. He didn't want to leave us behind, so he moved his whole family, my mom, me, my older sister Julie, and younger brother Matt. He moved us to France. And back then, of course, you couldn't afford airline travel unless you were rich. So we went by an ocean liner.
No
So in
kidding.
first grade, I sailed across the ocean in an ocean liner.
Wow.
We made many stops on the way there, in the Azores. I mean, I saw a volcano erupting at sea when I was a first grader.
No
And then
kidding.
we sailed in through the Strait of Gibraltar, and then we went to a number of different ports in the Mediterranean before we ended up in France near Cannes, which that's where Dad got us a house, rented us a house in Cannes. So
Mm.
I had this grand adventure as a first grader, which basically it infused my life with more stories that
Mm.
my average first grade classmates had at that point.
Right.
Well, no, it's true. I mean,
It's so true.
I had adventures. I had my perspectives. My first grade class only had 4 people in it. The curriculum was like a fourth grade class in
Right.
America. I
Right.
mean, we went to art museums, in
Mm.
first grade.
Yeah.
Instead of finger painting, I had to learn perspective, line, and perspective. You know, I was reading kids' classics.
Mm.
I was reading the Odyssey for kids when I was a young person. So all of that, I think, really contributed to a sense a love of story, a love of telling stories, and an appreciation for good stories. And I think those are the three elements that really put it all together, because I've always been this way.
That's amazing. And hey, Sam, so what was the motivation for Child of Storms? Tell us about that. What's the story behind the title?
Well, Child of Storms, the motivation behind okay, I've been writing professionally, I guess you could say, since 1982. So that's that you could call that a career. And I've published other books, and I've made documentary films. I've gotten written by credits. Jane will understand this. I've actually can call myself a screenwriter because I've been paid to write 6 screenplays. Not one has ever made it to the screen, but that doesn't matter.
That's common. That's very common.
No, you find that out in Hollywood, that there's very successful screenwriters and no actor has ever spoken a single word.
Yet.
So I've spent a long time writing, but I realized that there are a lot of my stories that I've never written before, and that I've told them. Like I was just talking to Jane's brother, Don, and he was going, Sam, there's so many stories in this book that I heard you talk about on long drives and around campfires, but that you actually sat and wrote them down. So I was writing a collection of my own stories down, and I thought, you know what, these might make an interesting book. And so initially I started also including articles I'd written, for magazines mostly, magazines and a couple other books. But as time went on and I was working on more of these stories, I realized writing for a magazine, it's a whole different template and a whole different tool than writing, for example, a memoir. Because then I started thinking, these are sort of getting to be kind of like a memoir, not chronological, but still at the end of the book, you get a pretty good portrait of where, my path. So I started collating them and putting them together, slowly winnowing out the stories that had been previously published. And suddenly I had a book, and I thought, you know what? I think maybe at this time in my life is sort of a transitional time in my relationship with this sport and lifestyle that I've dedicated myself so fully to. Maybe it is time to tell my stories, origin stories, adventure accounts. I mean, I've been known as a travel writer. I hardly wrote anything about my own travels. I was always on assignment, So I've realized I think it's about time. And luckily, my brother Matt had just published a book about a year and a half ago, a remarkable collection of his 35 years of magazine writing. And at a party one night, after the publication with the publishers, like always, we're sitting around telling stories and stuff. And I started, regaling with a few stories. And the publisher said, gee, Sam, it sounds kind of interesting. Do you have any of your own stories? And I said, matter of fact, I do. And I submitted a few, and they said, this is great. So Child of Storms was born, suddenly. And that's why I call it a memoir in progress, because I'm still moving forward. It isn't complete. I mean, it's a look back, but from a position where I'm looking forward on sort of a new area of the path I'm on. So.
Yeah, there are few people that live the life of adventure as you do, Sam. I mean, so many people are the armchair tourists, right? They just love to have their adventures, but you have lived them forever. I mean, I never knew that story about you from first grade and being in Cannes. Yeah. What an amazing, amazing way to start and launch like that.
No, it was an amazing, it was this, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, it must have been when you learned how to surf. I learned at an ancient age. I was 11. I have friends that started when they were 3 and 4,
Like, hi.
But I say, no, the seminal experience of my life was living in Europe. Now, unfortunately, our trip got cut dramatically short because all U.S. military personnel were withdrawn during the Cuban Missile Crisis because they thought World War III was about to start. I had no idea that my life was so affected by that, by that incredible historical footnote that we had to sail back on another ship because they thought World War III was going to start. But that was the seminal experience of my life. I mean, how do you get home and go back to first grade in Brunswick, Maine, and you climbed Vesuvius and gone down into the creek? And how
did you do that?
No, so my dad.
How did you cope then, Sam?
Listen to those words. Yeah. Climb down into Vesuvius.
No, my dad's ship would go from port to port. On the weekends, we would take trains to the port and visit him. and we would always do adventurous things with him. And yeah, I toured Pompeii. They wouldn't let us in the bathhouse because there was erotic frescoes. I said, no, no bambino, no bambino. But my dad got us, hired a guide, put us on donkeys, and we went up. And so,
Amazing.
we were in Genoa. Dad took us to see Christopher Columbus's house. So
Wow.
when you get back to first grade, and I'm telling you, this happened a number of times to both me and Matt. The teachers and principals called Dad and my mom into the office, and they said, "Look, Sam's a wonderful guy, very bright, but he's got this trait of exaggerating and exaggerating stories.
No.
Um, and we think that you need to address it because he's adamant about these stories." And so they go, like, for example, we're studying Christopher Columbus, and he says, "Oh, I went to his house." And my dad goes, "We did go to his house. What are you talking about?" But think about that was like to be a kid and being invalidated that way.
Right.
That's true. Right. Right.
And it really affected my brother Matt, because more so than me, he did have a gift for exaggeration. When his story about Vesuvius, it might have been erupting. We may have had to flee from the volcano. But still, it's invalidating. So I was a bad student. I was a bad student for anything I wasn't interested in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, your writing is something just it's so exciting to read, always, always, always. So thank you for not listening to those teachers, those naysayers, and living your adventure on and on and on. It's so exciting, Sam.
Yeah, no, it was, and then, moving to Hawaii. Once again, we went by ship,
Yeah.
which, how exciting is that?
Yeah.
Now I'm a fifth grader, that's incredible. Little did I know that the reason why we went on a ship, we thought it was because you always go by ship. Little did we know it was because my parents were getting a divorce and they didn't tell us. And my dad wanted us on a ship. So for 5 days, no lawyer could serve him any papers.
Oh,
So
wow.
we only found that out later. I mean,
Wow. How did that
had
affect you?
No, my parents got a divorce and didn't tell us. I mean, you can imagine what that was
My
like.
God.
Yeah. We moved to Hawaii. Wait, how come mom's not here?
Oh.
Well, she's got to work through the summer school and then she'll be here. I mean,
They wanted to protect you.
I don't know if it didn't turn out that well, but
Some of our
no.
parents didn't have quite the tools they needed to be able to communicate emotionally. It was hard for them.
this is that what you just said about protection. It's a good point, because one of the chapters I wrote in the book, it was about my mother, Mary Ann, and it was probably the most profound writing experience I've ever had, because I sort of had to I had to bring up feelings that I haven't, maybe not, certainly I've never articulated, but I may have never even acknowledged in my life. I had to bring those up, and I wanted to write about them and write about my experience with my mother. And it was a transformative experience.
Yeah.
I mean, a real transformative experience after all these years. And it was interesting because I have my best friend, Jimmy Hunter. He's a figure in the book on a number of chapters. I sent him a rough draft of that chapter, and he's known me for, like, not as long as Jane, but he's known me for a good 48 years, 47 years.
But more intimately, for sure.
Yeah. But he said, "Sam," he goes, "after reading this, I realize anyone that wants to know anything about who you are and why you are and what formed you, they just need to read this one chapter."
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
I'm
Can you
gonna
share a
write
tiny bit about it, about your mom?
Did you bring it?
About why that was so.
Yeah.
Well, look, I'll give you, if you don't
Wanna read
mind,
it?
I'll give you an
Yes,
abbreviated.
please.
I'll give you an abbreviated why he felt this way, because what he said after my life, I mean, after knowing me almost my life, he goes, "Sam, it's so easy to see how, with the breakup of your family, you retreated, to basically just to survive, you retreated into the surfing world, and you created a identity-based lifestyle at a young age because you couldn't trust your family. You couldn't trust anyone else,
Yeah.
And the way that chapter starts out, I'll just read a section of it. It starts out, "When I was 12 years old, I didn't know my mother was an alcoholic. I thought she was insane. Because when you think about it, when you're that age, how do you just rationalize the behavior?
Right.
So I wrote a section here about how when my parents eventually, we realized they were divorced, every summer we had to fly back from Hawaii and spend like 2 months with my mother in Ohio. And for already a super stoked young surfer, that was like a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I talked about how, um, at the time, I didn't know my mother was an alcoholic. All parents drank, all adults
Yeah.
drank beer, and
Yeah.
so I didn't realize that. So I mean, I wrote a section here. I won't read the whole thing, but I wrote a section about how I didn't understand what she was going through, but I knew I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I didn't like the changes in her. I didn't like the mood swings. I didn't like, I didn't like I said I didn't like the way she'd fix me with a gaze that sought to divine my thoughts, pleading and blaming at the same time. I was 12 years old trying to handle all this. And every day while we were back there, because she moved to my dad's hometown to try to create a more stable environment so she could get custody. But every afternoon, we'd have to get in the car and she'd drive us around town to visit his relatives to try to say, look, I'm being a good mom. I'm trying to, I want them living close to you. And so every day in the afternoon, we would drive. And I said, to me, the drunkenness passed for madness. So I assumed as we weaved across center dividers, ran stoplights, and furrowed soft shoulders all over Newark, that my mother, having gone insane, was now trying to kill us. That if she couldn't have us, nobody would. That for every second in that car, we were riding a pistol with white walls, and the chamber would spin, stop, and the hammer would click, click, click. Little Matt rode shotgun in the bucket seat next to her, straining against his lap belt, barely able to see over the dash. That didn't stop him from grabbing the wheel at the very last second one night, so that when crossing a bridge over the North Fork of the Licking River, we crashed into the guardrail and not into the rushing dark water below. Quick
Gee.
thinking for a third grader. My sister, I said, quick thinking for a third grader. I rode in the back seat next to Julie, who sat quietly, looking straight forward, but with one hand on the seatbelt buckle. To this day, she's never told me what she was thinking. Myself, I would wedge down into the footwell facing backward, my back to the driver's seat, hunched over like I was praying, though I wasn't. I had an issue of Surfer magazine laid out on the back seat, and I would open it to a page I really liked and then bring my face down just close enough to barely focus on the image. I knew every page by heart, so it didn't matter if it was dark or not. But I would crouch there, fingers in my ears, staring at the page, so that if at any second I was killed, my very last image would be one of surfing. On the night we hit the bridge, I had volume 9, number 3, the giant summer issue, with U.S. champ Corky Carroll on the cover, open to a feature titled Safari East by Laguna Beach writer Craig Lockwood on page 96, a photo of Californian Greg Tucker poised on the nose with Florida's Canaveral Pier in the background. I was 12 years old, and it was very important for me to die a surfer. At the time, I'd been a surfer for less than a year.
Wow.
Sam
That's really
George.
profound, Sam.
So
Sam
that's-
George.
that's why Jimmy said, Sam, that's all you need to know about you.
Yeah.
How you completely immersed yourself into that identity. The surfing world became your world.
So it's like freedom, right? Does that equate
Well,
to freedom?
it was, I had an identity there. I had a sense of belonging. I had, like, people have said, well, did you ever, were you really worried about your dad's approval? I said, hell no. The only approval I ever cared about was Surfer Magazine. I wanted Surfer Magazine to approve me. I wanted to be the surfer that Surfer was telling me I should be. I
That's
mean, you
unbelievable.
could say it's destiny. I ended up to be the editor of Surfer.
That's cool.
I
Yeah,
used to wanna-
destiny that you were the editor. I mean,
I
it's
used to want to
just.
be in Surfer, and then I became Surfer. So
Did people know while you were the editor that you had that story? Because
no, I've
that's
never told it before.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, I've never told it before.
it informs so much about. I don't know much about your life, even though because from my little girl perspective, it was just iconic. But wow, Sam, that's
But I mean,
amazing.
looking at it sort of stepping back and looking at it from being mindful about it, think about being 12 years old and having those emotions. My mom's trying to kill me. My mom wants us dead. I mean, that's yes, we didn't, there are young people that have grown up in much worse circumstances, much worse. I mean, I've often told people, I've had people tell me later, God, you had a horrible childhood. I go, I did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And they go, well, look at your divorce and all that. I go, no, but think about this. Both my parents never for a minute let me feel that they didn't love me and that they didn't think I was great. I go, right there, that's all you really need from your parents.
Right.
And basically that's all I needed because I became very independent.
Yeah.
But I knew my parents were fighting tooth and nail to have me with them. That I interpreted that as, and
That's a
then
good
later
interpretation, Sam.
It
yeah,
really
and then
is.
because I said, look, my parents loved me. They thought I was great.
Yeah.
You know? Later in the chapter on my mom, what the real transformative experience for me was that for almost the first time, I had to really acknowledge what a wonderful person my mother was. For my whole life since that time, I defined her as an alcoholic. That was it. Anytime anybody asked, what was your mother like? Well, she was an alcoholic. She was also a fantastic elementary school teacher and a great high school athlete. And I had never acknowledged that. And in this story, I started acknowledging it and really pointing, wow, my mom, in those first 12 years, my mom shaped me.
Yeah. And she had a disease.
And I let that disease define her.
Right.
And I became estranged from her for 25 years.
Right.
But anyway.
So I would say that's a miracle at noon.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
It's a total miracle. I know.
I believe in it.
This is a good example of what's in the book. It's not a book about surfing. In matter of fact, I've told
I can't wait to read it. I
in
have
the
not read
entire
it. I'm going to
book-
read it.
In the entire book, I've only described 3 waves being ridden. So it's like it's stories that I think everybody can, most of them, some of them are humorous stories, but even the story where I went to war, Sam George versus the United States of America about my audit at the IRS. Everyone can relate to that.
Everyone can relate to that.
Mine just has a surfing theme to it. But most of the stories, they have themes that everybody can relate to. Insecurities, dealing with parents, dealing with the father's disapproval, divorce. I mean, things, they're stories set in my world, but they're pretty relatable topics. So it wasn't written for a surfing audience. It was written more for a general audience.
Beautiful. And Sam, we're also so grateful to be even saying this. Can we announce this also, that you're going to be working with us and teaching with our summer school very soon?
Yay!
You know what? I think I'm so looking forward to that. I've mentioned several times my good friend Jimmy Hunter, who's my personal guru, and he said something. He may have paraphrased this, but he said something once. He said, "You know what? Having knowledge and not sharing it is the same as not having it."
Wow.
Yeah,
so that's
brilliant.
why
That's fabulous. That's so true.
Yay!
So we get to see more of you, Sam.
That's right. You'll get to see more.
Amazing.
Yeah, Sam, do you want to quickly say what the class is?
And it'll be held in Sam's car.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that's kind of fun, and I like it.
Down at the library.
I like it.
We'll work that out. I think I can get a device that works. You know what? Now, this course has been adapted.
You can put your sticky notes on the side of the window.
I
know. This actually sort of works. It
does. It totally works.
Yeah, it's more exotic than your normal Zoom call.
Yeah, I love it.
The course that I envision, it's adapted from a university writing course that I got accredited and developed a syllabus about what I call feature writing, writing a feature story, for at the time, for like a magazine or a website or like a Substack blog. And it's sort of an adaptation because over the years, I realized that my writing for magazines and feature work that I've done in other areas, they followed a certain template. And I started going back and looking at other magazines and other stories, and I realized, wow, I just absorbed that template. So I developed a template. We taught it for 3 summers to university, mostly sophomore university students. And I've adapted it, and it's called Write the Perfect Story. And essentially, I'm going to teach this very easily articulated and easily understood template that gives you a structure to where almost anyone can write a compelling, like professional story, that's suitable for
That's fabulous.
submission.
That's great. Well, this summer, everyone.
Yeah, it's called Write the Perfect Story.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, we're
'Cause
looking forward to
great,
it.
we all have great stories. Just some people need a little more help telling those stories.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was just lucky that somehow I developed the ability to tell my stories, but we all have great stories.
So cool.
And
Thank
at
you
the end-
so much, Sam. Oh my God, we could be speaking
Yeah.
this is kind of the never-ending conversation that we wish we had.
We will continue. We'll meet you at the bonfire, and we'll continue
Yes.
talking.
We'll talk at the bonfire. So,
Yeah.
no, thank you. This is,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was
And
fun to
Sam, we'll
meet
put
you.
we'll put all your links up too about where people can find your book and how they can find where they can reach you. And
Do you have that, or you need me to send that to you?
we'll get that from you.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
yes, and we'll
then
put it up here on this when we post this.
And we'll
Yes.
talk soon about the program. I'm really looking forward to working with you guys.